Hi there, welcome to a podcast series that we have started with my friend Nigel Kilpatrick on compassion leadership. And we have been working over the past several months on creating a compassionate promise framework where we could actually help companies to implement compassion in a very structured, succinct, and in a time bound approach. This is a series where we're going to talk about lots of parts that deal with compassion in an organization, and we will share tips and techniques on how to overcome them. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Nigel.
Thank you. I can't wait to get started on this because it's such a big topic. It's a massive topic that not a lot of people understand. So thank you for joining. I'm Nigel Kilpatrick. I'm CEO of Compassion in Business. But guess what? It puts compassion into business. So the name, it does what it says on the tin. But again, we've worked together so closely for really hard on this new program, the Compassionate Promise program, that when we launched it not so long ago, the effects were almost immediate for people. So I can't wait to having this little series with you. I think it'd be great to discuss what compassion really is, because many people don't know what it is. They think it's a soft skill training program, but it's not. It's actually driving huge quantifiable benefits. So I can't wait to get started. But thank you for setting the whole thing up.
Absolutely. And in fact, Nigel, as we were talking about the compassion part, the reality is, even I did not know the difference between compassion and empathy. So maybe we start with that. So let our listeners and viewers understand what the difference is and why is it so critical to understand the difference?
Well, that's a great question. I think, there's some really big fundamental difference between sympathy, empathy, and compassion, and how it affects us in our business life, in our home life, in our personal life. It may be okay to kind of live and operate around an emotional state like sympathy and empathy. Also, we need to avoid pity or as much as we can. Pardon me, but pity, sympathy, and empathy, they're emotional states. Compassion is an intentional state. That's where, when you have intention, that's when action can really happen. And a lot of founders, a lot of business leaders, particularly in small to medium-sized enterprises, get stuck in this kind of level of leading with empathy and find themselves getting so kind of caught up in the trap of all empathy, can't push through the boundary and push through the ceiling of compassion to make really, really tough decisions. We all have to make really tough decisions. And very often we avoid them because we're worried about the consequence of how our decision will affect someone else. However, that's because we're stuck in this layer of empathy. Compassion is very, very different. Compassion actually allows us to make very difficult decisions, but we do it in a very human way. Very hard situations, but we do it in a very human way. In actual fact, there's a biological difference between empathy and compassion. They actually hit different parts of our brain. So when actually we start thinking from a leadership perspective, how do I start applying these differences into my business? Then you start thinking about how the operations of the business start changing. If you start thinking compassionately as a leader, and everything can change. Literally the engagement of employees can change, the performance can change, the way you think about writing a contract can change, the way you write your employee handbook can be completely different. So it is a intentional strategic gain, and it's a real powerful business tool for leaders to use in their armory. Now, how they show up every single day. And that's the real difference. So it's scientifically different, it's biologically different. And my goodness, does it make a difference to your business when you start thinking in a compassionate process? I'll tell you what it's not. It's not this thing about being a soft skills training tool. That's what most people think. When I talk about compassion, they go, oh, no, it's just about being kind to people. Is it the same as being empathetic? Is it being sympathetic? We're all compassionate. Yes, but massively no. You're missing the real point around what compassionate leadership is all about. Yes, you need to listen with compassion, sorry, you need to listen with empathy, but lead with compassion if you want to make a real change in your business in this current climate that we are in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks for that detailed explanation. Just kind of summarizing it. So we could pretty much call compassion as empathy plus action. It is important for the leaders to understand why and how their employees react. But it's not just the understanding, but the ability to take meaningful actions, wise actions based on understanding that emotional state of your employees, right? Will that be a good summary?
Yeah, I think compassion is sympathy and empathy in action. That's what
Right.
it really is. So empathy has no action to it.
Hmm.
So pity, I always I use a kind of a quite a hard analogy when I'm talking about it. I say, imagine you're walking past a homeless person on the street and you see them lying there. And the first example of an emotional reaction to that is pity, where you feel sorry for them. And that emotion goes by in a second or two. You look at it, you recognize it, some kind of feeling, but you walk past and that's done. The next layer up is sympathy, where you sympathize with them, you kind of a higher level of emotional feeling. You still don't do anything about it, but you have a higher level of consciousness about it. So beyond pity. And actually, there's you and I both know there's a leadership quadrant all around this, which we talk about in the workshop. But the next emotional state is empathy, and empathy is when you see the person, homeless person on the street, and their problem starts to become your problem. So you're feeling with the person, so that's the transference. And when you're in that kind of state as a business leader, that's when you start to be really ineffective. So you're in the quadrant called caring avoidance, because you're just trying to avoid everything you can, because you're taking on people's problems and you can't find a way out. And actually what you end up doing is performance starts to dwindle for the person you're trying to help. And my own performance starts to dwindle too. And the end result is I get hijacked by this whole thing called empathy. And I'm leading with it because I want to be this great listener, this great person, but actually it's killing me at the same time. And you end up going from empathy hijack into this thing called empathy burnout. And empathy burnout, I've had it many times in my career, where I've just been wanting everyone to like me. I want to be really accepted. Your problems become my problems, but so ineffective as a business leader. But what I really want to do is take action. I want to be able to listen with empathy, but I want to actually take firm actions and do it in a kind way. So there are 4 states of decision making, and from pity, which we want to try and avoid because that's the worst place to be, and we want to move up to compassion. So the quadrant that we take people through is, to avoid it. But it is really coming into the business domain in a very big way, driven through all the recent entities, or the recent issues we've had with COVID-19 lockdown and all kind of stuff. So compassionate leadership is the thing for today. Is no question about it. It's changing the way leaders need to think. But if you leave compassion only in your mindset as being a leadership style, you're missing the opportunity, because compassionate thinking from a strategy perspective is where the real power comes in. And that's where the real change can be effective. It's one thing to be able to make a business leader a better, more kinder leader. That's great. It's great to make the workforce. We, as you know, both know, Gallup the data has been talking recently about the horrible state of the global workforce. We've got 21% of the global workforce who are now feeling sadness or anger every single day. And I was a wee boy going through my management training. We would look at stress and anxiety if we even were bothered by it. But now,
Right.
now we're looking at stress and anger. And the World Health Organization is now saying that we're actually in a suicide pandemic at work.
Yeah.
And that's the rise. So we can't stand. As business leaders, we have a real responsibility and accountability now to do something very, very different. And
Yeah.
you and I both believe that a compassionate operating model is the way out of this issue. And I recently described it. The only way out is through, and compassion is the arrow that cuts through all this noise and allows businesses to really rethink all the main pillars of their business. So you can have, the end result of it all is a a better, healthier, happier leadership team where the politics and toxicity is removed. A workforce that, not at the bottom, but the workforce that's executing all the work have a place to de-stress and, therefore reducing, obviously, sickness days and improving retention issues, all that kind of stuff. But that's where the power of it is. In the middle, it's this operating layer that it has to be sustainable, because something has to shift, and compassion is that shift.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, if you look at, and this is how I kind of describe it, yeah, because literally back in the 20th century, most of the competitive advantage was gained through acquisition of physical assets in most of the cases, and if you look at the companies, if you look at the Fortune 500 list from the 70s, 80s, you'll find majority of them were manufacturing, production, industrial houses. You would also have banks. You'd also have petroleum companies. You would have insurance companies. But that was the state. And at that point in time, if you had more physical assets, you would use the physical assets. You leverage them to create the competitive advantage.
Yeah.
People did not play a very critical role, except for you could attribute it to the leadership. You could attribute to some of the functional management, but it was expected that everybody had a job description, everybody had a roles and responsibilities, and they would essentially execute upon it pretty much like a robot, kind of thing, right? That was the expectation. That fast forward to contemporary time, where the Fortune 500 landscape has completely changed. I mean, while there's still some petroleum companies, there's still some banks, but a large number of them are either service company or software or technology company. And the bottom line of these companies are that it's talent. It's very talent centric, and over the years, it's the people's ability to extract, to unlock the potential of this talent is where the competitive advantage magic sauce is. Now, here's the interesting thing, and this is where I think it's the clash between the conventional, the 20th century management thinking, and then the emotional intelligence side of things, where it's to do everything with people, whether it's leaders, whether it's middle managers, whether it's employees, everything is to do with leaders, are coming literally head on with each other. And in my belief, COVID just accelerated the whole requirement of well-being, of mindfulness, of emotional intelligence, and that's why it has become so much more important for organizations to start embracing compassion. Yes, it's important to understand the different aspects, but on the other side, one also has to be very, very pragmatic, very, very structured on how to make it happen, because otherwise it's all lots of good conversations, and it still remains, as you pointed out, still remains as a soft skill. Whereas for me, it is, yes, some people interchangeably use soft skill with power skill. But for me, compassion is a power skill. It's an enabling skill, which most of the companies, unfortunately, don't have in today's world.
Yeah, and to your point, as you mentioned it, I was thinking, what a nice phrase I could say. COVID-19 was almost the universe shaking us and going, "Wake up! You've got to do things differently. What's wrong with you? Why are you still living and operating in the Industrial Revolution kind of era?" Yeah, but you're absolutely right. So I think the shift is happening. It's getting there. And, when we had a workshop, we had a wonderful workshop in London when we were talking to some of the participants, and we were taking them through the journey of, difference between compassion and empathy, which we're talking about now. They were gobsmacked.
Yeah.
I just did not know there was a difference between the two.
Yeah.
And, we both had the phone calls the following few days from the participants going, "Hey, Nigel, I tried what you suggested, and my God, it changed the way I think about people." And, if I had the time, and I'd have dug a little deeper to what do you mean by people? Well, about performing them, the conversation would have gone. I'm just thinking about it, about performance. Okay, well, where does performance come from? or performance comes from people, but who directs the performance from the people? It's
Correct.
you.
Yeah.
And so what, so all that kind of stuff. And the thing that gets me the most when I talk about this subject about compassion, because it is a massively strategic and tactical advantage for a company to start thinking compassionately as an operating model and as leadership style, is they just can't hang the hat on the quantifiable benefits of it all. They can't say, how do I make money from compassion?
Yeah.
Why should I change?
Yeah.
Well, we'll just look at the last 300 years. Leading with empathy hasn't done you much good, has it really? So there has to be this real power of change. So we spend, this is where the Compassionate Promise program really comes into its own, where we start quantifying all those elements of efficiency, revenue increase, reduction of operational waste, all the people benefits that come through it. Now, you and I both know, as you said, it can be all talk. If it stays a conversation on the board table, or it stays in the realms of senior leadership committee meetings, and it doesn't become the DNA of the business, then it will just remain talk, and we won't progress as a human society at work. We'll get worse.
Yeah.
And that's my real worry, is that we're going to get stuck in the mud and not make a push. So we have a moment in history right now where we can really make a change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the problem that I see is a lot of the leaders, they believe that while there is a challenge with the employee well-being, that's not their problem. Somebody else needs to take care of it, right? Let's say, and I'm not saying all CFOs, I'm saying CFO thinks I need to take care of the financial health of the company, and therefore anything to do with people, it should fall with the HR. HR says, I'm so busy on the hiring and the comp and ban and all of the payroll thing that I just don't have the bandwidth. And by the way, we don't own these employees. They don't report to us. It should be the functions themselves who should be taking care of the well-being and all of that stuff. The CEO says, listen, I'm losing talent, regularly, good talent leaving. What can we do to stem it? And people are talking about many of the symptoms, but very few companies, unfortunately, have taken a lead to address this. And not just that, the other thing is, it's the ostrich thinking. It's like, hey, put your head into the sand and just think that the problem is going to go away. Unfortunately, we are moving in a direction where people are only going to become more important in the equation.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've both held very senior leadership positions in some pretty big companies, and that analogy you talked about, the CFO. I need to take care of the numbers health of my business. But who's taking care of you, CFO?
Right?
You are a human being.
Yeah.
And I will bet that if you're worried about the numbers, you are not in an emotional good place either.
Yes.
So you're going home and this is rubbing off on your family and your friends, or whoever it might be. This is what it's all about.
Yeah.
And I've done the 10 traits of compassionate leadership, and I talk about trust and honesty and all the other traits that fall into place. But this is what it's all about. You and I did an exercise with some people recently, where we said, how many hats do you wear in your role as a founder, as CEO of an entrepreneur of a business? Oh, I wear all these hats. I've got my hat for being a leader. I've got my hat for worrying about. I wear my money hat. I wear my investment hat. I wear my customer hat. So why don't you just take all the bloody hats off and just not wear any? I mean, why do you turn up to work in a different persona than you are when you were born as a human being? I mean, we are all human beings. For some reason, and I don't know what it is, I'll figure it out. Getting into the deep of it, we have this the world, or the word work, the word employment, the word business has this kind of persona that we expect we have to be a different human being to the one that we naturally are. And we play out this stuff. But when we leave the day, we go back to another, our normal, natural self, but we take the burden of the last 10 hours or 8 hours or 9 hours to work with us. It's just crazy. But it's in this moment of this throughout the course of this hat we have to wear called work, we don't make good decisions
Yep.
because we're making decisions that are based on the effect and in the environment and our expectations based on the role that I'm playing, the hat I'm wearing. So there's a fundamental that CFO that said, I've got to take care of my numbers, probably hasn't put a mirror in front of him saying, who's taking care of you, my friend? Who's doing that? And if you had 10,000 people, you'd have 10,000 mirrors. Your employee handbook should be a mirror. That's what it should be. Self-awareness, self-reflection, and just realize you're a human being. In fact, as you're talking, I'm going to show you the best employee handbook that I want every company in the world to have if I can find it. Where is it? You keep on talking. Here we go. I think every person, every employee in every company, in every country should have this book. It's called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. This is the book. And if you watch it at Christmas, this is the most beautifully describing book about how people should be. It is wonderful. If you're listening to this, give this to every single employee. It is incredible. Anyway, I'm off my soapbox.
No, absolutely. And in fact, we'll put the details about the book in the description box. But, what a way to wrap up the first episode. I just want to leave it on a cliffhanger, right? I mean, you talked about the employment, the personality and the employment clash. Maybe that's the topic that we look at in our next episode. What do you think, Nigel?
Oh, that'd be great. I mean, I think, what I think everyone should do, it's just, we should just be brave to be who we are in business. That's what we need to do. And I think we're standing at an inflection, all of us as business leaders, entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs, CFOs, it doesn't really matter what role you're playing in business. We're all standing at an inflection point in the history of business. And we have to make this change. We have to all realize there's a different way of doing something. I'm not saying that history hasn't worked. It's just that today is very different to it was 5 years ago. And there's no playbook for how we should run businesses today coming out the accelerated path of COVID-19. So we need to create a different playbook. We need to help leaders of tomorrow understand how they need to operate for businesses tomorrow. We need to help the managers of today lead differently and manage differently. And I'm a massive believer that compassion is that strength that will get everyone through. So thank you for today's podcast. It's great. Let's continue the conversation. Let's go to the next one.
Absolutely. And I'm going to end the podcast here by saying we did not have a playbook in the past, but now we do. It's called Compassionate Leadership Promise Framework. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a pleasure to have this conversation, and we will see you in the next episode soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Did you find the conversation interesting? Do you want to take your organization to the next level of compassion in business? Then why don't you join one of our workshops at London? For more information, visit our websites, and that's fifthchrome.com/compassionpromise or compassioninbusiness.co.uk. I repeat the websites, fifthchrome.com/compassionpromise or compassioninbusiness.co.uk.